come to you.
Who else were you expecting?
Well, bust my boiler.
After the box office disaster that was Thomas and the Magic Railroad, Brittlecroft was forced to step down as both the deputy chairman and the director of her own company, only to retain sharing responsibilities and become an executive producer. On the other hand, David Mitton, who had been the director of the initial first 5 seasons, turned over as a camera operator and a script consultant for all script writers during production. The 6th season of Thomas saw a drastic change in tone, from what was an edgy and ballsy show that wasn't afraid to scare the shit out of kids, changed into a generic and repetitive mess. This would continue for 10 years until Mattel would pick up the franchise in 2012 and turn it into something magical again, before fucking up only after 4 years. But anyway, season 6 for me is probably the weakest of what fans like to call classic series. Sure, season 7 got absolutely fumbled in the United States, but it still retained that magic that made Thomas so great. But unfortunately, that didn't happen with season 6. It introduced a bundle of new characters who would all turn out to be recurring characters all these years later, which can't be said for the ones about season 7, but with DVDs, it was pretty average. The UK and US both got your, run-of-the-mill standard releases, but in the UK, we got something extra. Bumper Pie Collection was released on the 23rd of May 2005 and was made to commemorate 60 years of the Railway series. It featured 12 episodes from the 6th and 7th series and was expectedly well received by fans, but there was one issue. You see, by the time 2005 rolled around, Hit Entertainment had already absorbed the company and was focused on making Thomas an educational baby property, and had already made 2 seasons of that style of show, and with that we got a new intro which in reality was just an instrumental of the roll call with Thomas going down his branch line, much like the original theme. Although for some reason, Hit Entertainment decided to use this intro for all of the episodes on this release, which initially had the original theme at the start. Not only that, but for the season 7 episodes, they used the reorchestrated versions of the episodes by Robert Hartshorn. What was their reason for this? I don't know, but what I do know is that it is extremely jarring to see episodes like 3 Cheers for Thomas have really unfitting music alongside them. This release marked the last Thomas DVD and VHS to be distributed by VCI, who had released every Thomas VHS and DVD since Your Favourite Story Collection in 1995. After this release, they would merge with BBC Video and become 2 Entertain, in which they would distribute all future Thomas DVDs until the Spear of Sodor in 2008. 2 Entertain would also strangely re-release this DVD as well as almost every UK Thomas DVD released prior to this one, with no changes made other than their logo being on the side and the DVDs themselves being in the style of carry cases. Why? Just why? Anyway, the episodes on the DVD are as follows: Harvey to the Rescue, A Bad Day for Harold the Helicopter, Twin Trouble, Percy's Chocolate Crunch, Thomas the Jet Engine, The World's Strongest Engine, Thomas Percy and the Squeak, Edward the Very Useful Engine, 3 Cheers for Thomas, Gordon and Spencer, What's the Matter with Henry, and Reneus on the Roller Coaster. Now for this video I'll be ranking these episodes from worst to best, just to spice things up a bit as I don't want this to get boring. So without further ado, let's begin. In last place, no questions asked, is Thomas Percy and the Squeak. To say this episode is boring is an understatement. For the people who don't watch my channel regularly, I don't like season 6, like, almost at all. It has some good episodes, don't get me wrong, but this is certainly not one of them. I don't know what it is about this episode, but god damn, it's so boring. The only thing I can take away from this episode is a spicy meme that I'm sure most of you know.
Well, one thing's for sure, said Gordon. He won't choose Dirty Percy.
Don't call me Dirty Percy!
But other than that, this episode doesn't offer me anything entertaining or even slightly interesting. Alicia Botti's scream is the most ear-piercing thing I've ever heard, and yes, it was intended to be played off for last, but it just comes off as loud and obnoxious. The most I'd give the episode is a 3 out of 10, and that's being generous. The next worst episode is What's the Matter with Henry. Yeah, this one speaks for itself. Now, the concept of this episode is actually really interesting, and if handled right, this could have been one of my favourite episodes, but in true Season 7 fashion, the execution is terrible. Now let me ask you something. Are Thomas and Percy mischievous? Yes. Are they naive? Yes. But are they so rude that they completely disregard someone's health who they know who had health issues in the past? Fuck no. Thomas and Percy are kind-hearted yet silly engines. They should know when something's wrong, especially with Henry, but in this episode, no. They say he's being lazy and then leave him extra trucks to take. If this episode was all about Bill, Ben and Derek, then sure, that makes sense. Bill and Ben are heartless assholes and would act like this. Other than having a good message, this episode is absolutely dreadful, and it was definitely a sign that the people making it were, definitely losing their control of what they could do and what they couldn't do with the series. It's quite disheartening, if anything. Next is Edward the Very Useful Engine. And oh boy, do I have something to say about this one. So, we all know that throughout the first 2 seasons, Gordon thought Edward was this old-fashioned piece of scrap. But by the time Edward's exploit came round, Edward proved Gordon wrong and he gained respect for him. And throughout seasons 3, 4 and 5, nothing. Absolutely nothing from Gordon. That is what we like to call an arc. Then why, in God's name, would they bring back the Edward is old-fashioned trope? All of this just proves that they were running out of story ideas and just bring back this already concluded arc. This even happens in season 18, during the Renaissance era when they knew what they were doing. I can't enjoy this episode while just knowing that what I'm watching is just a middle finger to one of the best episodes of all time. I expect this kind of shit from the Miller era, not from season 6. As much as I hate it, it should not stoop so low. 4 out of 10. Those 4 points come from the model work and Angelus's narration, as that's always a bit of a plus. Next on the list is Reneus and the roller coaster. Now from this episode onwards, I like these episodes, or at least think they're okay. The previous 2 were absolute dog poo, but these range from alright to fantastic. Anyway, Reneus and the roller coaster is one of those rare classic Thomas episodes where I never saw it as a kid at all. And was I missing out? Not really. Now don't get me wrong, this episode is okay. It just doesn't really stand out to me amongst all the other episodes from season 7. If I watched it as a kid, then maybe I would have, loved it. But unfortunately, now I'm much older, I've become a lot more mature and critical. Anyway, something that stands out to me in this episode is the model work and camera tricks. Well, yes, now it just looks like the camera is wonky. I can appreciate the team actually put some time and effort into the episodes, something that became a rarity as time went on. However, as much as I can appreciate all that, it is nothing special and it is very forgettable. 5 out of 10. Up next is Highway to the Rescue, an episode that has one of the most underrated crashes in the whole series. Now this is where the episodes start to get real good. Other than a small slip up with Edward being completely out of character, this episode is fantastic. It introduces Harvey well, with him being an outcast and feeling as if he has no use, even though he has a bloody crane arm. It shows he has flaws and isn't perfect. Take notes, Ian McHugh, you lying bastard.
Henry and Edward, still very much part of the show.
How can you chat so much shit?
I'd give the episode a 6 out of 10. And next is A Bad Day for Hal the Helicopter. To be honest, the only reason why I like this episode is because of the crash. Seeing vehicles that aren't steam engines crash in Thomas is something that I always enjoy. And that's why I love the pack. Anyway, the episode itself is actually pretty good. It's nothing phenomenal and the whole Percy and Harold thing is a bit overdone, but the ending for the episode is very heartwarming, and as you all know, I'm a sucker for endings. This one was a bit short, I'm not gonna lie, but in general, probably a 7 out of 10. The crash is that good and I really like the ending.
All the engines tooted, and Harold hovered so low that only Percy could hear. "Thanks for getting help to pull me out of that haystack, dear chap," he said. "That's all right," said Percy. "That's what friends are for."
Next on the list is Percy's Chocolate Crunch, a staple of the Thomas franchise. Starting from season 5, lots of stories would become slightly more far-fetched and unrealistic. Episodes like Rusty and the Boulder and Thomas the Jet Engine were all episodes that were all played off for laughs, for the most part.
"We should have left this part of the island alone," he said thoughtfully. They moved Boulder to a hill close by the yards. Rusty is sure that on a clear night it is gazing up at the mountain and that its sighs are being carried on the wind to where it once used to stand, proud and silent. I wonder if Rusty is right, don't you?
Bad touch! Bad touch! Stranger danger!
The difference between these episodes and the ones from season 8 onwards is that the newer episodes make the characters brain dead and oblivious to their surroundings, whereas in episodes like this, the characters have a conscience and react in a way like a person would. Like in this episode where Percy is fed off of being dirty and in return gets even more dirty, and in the very end gets what he wants and more. And that's where my problem stems with season 8 to 16. The characters don't act like actual people. They act like mindless robots who have no common sense, and when they do get a proper personality, they fuck it up, like in Edward Strikes Out, where his character does a complete 360 for the sake of a story continuing. Don't get me wrong, the hit era did get some characters right at times. Both Gordon and James were handled far better in the late model era than they were in the CGI series. And yes, I mean the Brenner era too. Okay, now that my tangent is over, let's talk about the episode properly. Other than the season 6 style, which I'll always hate, this episode is probably the only season 6 episode that looks acceptable next to Toby's Little Lamb. Or Toby Had a Little Lamb, I cannot remember. Now, something that the UK at season 6 had that no other season did was peak Michael Angelus. Angelus has always been my favourite narrator and always will be, rest in peace. And as much as I hate season 6, Angelus puts his all into this season, and it's so weird to see his narration change so much within only 1 year. As in season 7, his narration was reduced from high energy excitement,
"Oh!" said Thomas. The driver tried to put on the brakes, but Thomas couldn't stop. "Oh boy!" The station master called ahead. "Clear the lines, it's a runaway train!"
to a bedtime story borefest.
"Maybe spotless records are made to be broken," smiled Thomas. "And then mended again," finished Arthur, "just like friendships."
But I digress. The episode is amazing, and don't lie, you wanted to eat Percy as a kid. That wasn't just me, was it?
Too much
Silence!
Ah yes, Thomas the Jet Engine, another staple of the Thomas franchise. Much like Percy's Chocolate Crunch, this episode wasn't your typical casual style of Thomas episode. It's a bloody roller coaster. This episode itself is a pure example of how writers can still make silly concepts work while still retaining that charm that Thomas has always been notorious for. Like I said before, Angelus is at his very best here, and I couldn't imagine what it was like in the recording studio with him while doing this. It would have been a blast. Another thing I'd like to note about this episode is that it's one of those episodes that got countless pieces of merchandise, and I'm going to list them all for you. Wooden Railway, Capsule Player Rail, Take Along, Motor Road and Rail, Trackmaster, Pocket Fantasy, numerous books, and a pre-made DVD for the US and the UK that only contains this episode. This just goes to show how far you can go with such a simple concept. As much as I'll always dislike Season 6, it really had its moments, and this is definitely one of them. 9 out of 10. Next up is Gordon and Spencer. Once again, it's a staple, but not for Season 6, but actually for Season 7. Something that Season 7 had going for it was its new characters. All of them are relatively memorable, and while only 2 of them became recurring characters, no, I don't count pointless cameos in Season 12, all of them got an introductory episode for themselves, and Spencer's is by far the best one. Within only one episode, we learn so much. We learn that Spencer is an egotistical snob who doesn't listen to others, and we also get introduced to a rivalry which will become a recurring theme in the few episodes, and even make its way into the movie King of the Railway as a side plot. The episode itself is an absolute highlight of this release, and a textbook example of an introductory episode. Establish the character and set up potential future story ideas, and this episode does exactly that. 10 out of 10. Coming in at third place is Twin Trouble, an episode which is surprisingly not talked about too much. If you've been watching New Thomas for the past few years, you'll most likely be aware of an episode called Emily in the Middle, which is an episode focused on the Scots getting into arguments and a genuine physical fight. That episode is a prime example of how not to do a Donald and Douglas episode. First thing you need to do is know what their characters are and what relationship they have with each other. They are brothers. Yes, I know, siblings do argue and in some cases they do fight. But Donald and Douglas are not like that. If you watch Break Van or read The Missing Coach, you will acknowledge that they care about each other and have each other's back. This episode completely ignores that concept and makes them bitter enemies. Even in Love Me Tender, which came out only a year prior to Emily in the Middle, got it right. Anyway, enough of that. This episode, much like Brickvan, this episode gets it. It understands that siblings have fallouts and sometimes don't talk to each other for periods of time. Depending on what they fall out over, that period of time can get longer and longer, but obviously this episode has to be 4 minutes and 30 seconds. But the point I'm trying to make is, no matter how bad times may be, you still love your folks and will not let them get hurt. And that is what is explored in this episode, as when Donald is in trouble and potentially is hurt, Douglas does not hesitate to go and help him, and even before this, Donald says this to Duck while he does something wrong.
Then things started to go wrong. Did you shunt those trucks onto the other line? Donald asked. You said you wanted them on the other line, Duck replied. No, that other line. The other line. Donald was cross. Douglas would have known what I meant, he huffed.
It shows that they will always care for each other no matter what. Other things to point out are the great crashes, actually decent looking sets, and models. And come on, it's Donald and Douglas, for Christ's sake, what do you expect? 10 out of 10. Taking the runner-up spot is The World's Strongest Engine, my favourite Season 6 episode and one of my favourite episodes of all time. Now, if you want to see Diesel at his best, here you go. It's right in front of you. The amount of Season 2 vibes I get from this episode is immense, and that just goes to show that if Hit didn't buy Thomas, we could have potentially gotten a few more seasons of this, and it's unfortunate that we never did, but what we have is fine. From the hilarious but haunting Diesel faces, the ridiculous crash, the satisfaction of seeing Henry pull 20 trucks, this episode has it all, and I would never ever have it either way. 10 out of 10, I'd give it 11, but I can't. And taking the number 1 spot for the best episode on Bumper Pint Collection is 3 Cheers for Thomas. Yes, I know you saw this coming, but this episode is just so monumental. The simple storyline, limited characters and rough sets, it really gives me Season 1 vibes. And the episode embraces that by having the last classic Thomas episode, a race between Thomas and Bertie. The episode knows what it is, and it knows what's going to happen after it comes out. It's a celebration for the people who've been through Thomas since the very beginning, and Thomas getting a medal is just the icing on the cake. I know I said I don't consider Season 6 and 7 classic, but this episode I will accept with open arms, and I'm happy to call it the end of Classic Thomas. The end of an era.
3 cheers for Thomas, the number 1 engine. But I still won the race, tooted Bertie.
Thomas just peeped happily.
Now, do I recommend this? I'm going to put it straight to the point. Purely because of what it stands as, I'll go with yes. You should buy this, and I do recommend you get it. And that's it. The end of Classic Thomas DVDs. It's been an emotional ride. It's been full of ups and downs. But it's been a fun ride. But as we all know, once you go up, the only place you can go is down. Go on then. What? Just one more. One more.